Okay, so this video is going to be trying to link certain people who seem like they'd be unrelated and show what the central link is. If you're someone who only likes short videos, today's not going to work out so good for you. This one I can see is going to take minimum half an hour. So if you're prepared to give that investment, stick around. Also, if you've come here to, confirm your biases, if you start thinking that this is, me trying to attack the freedom movement, that I'm trying to tear it apart, I get those accusations all the time. If that's what you believe, there's no point in you sticking around because you're just going to keep believing it no matter what gets said or what evidence gets shown to you, right? So best just move on and not waste your time and leave me out of it. So if you're not one of those people, if you're actually here to learn something you probably didn't consider, there could be some value in here for you. So we're just going to start with understanding that one of the biggest traps that most people who want to win their freedom fall into is the belief that they can chase the glory of the win in the moment while the rest of the population sincerely believes in the legitimacy of this structure, right? That lack of understanding of that and how it's the people's knowledge, it's the people's capacity to see through deception that changes how we live, right? It's not any one individual win. And so the investment in that individual win the moment is one of the biggest traps that most people get trapped in. And it's been deliberately set for you. So then you come across looking like a maniac and you're going to disassociate yourself from other people's capacity to see you as someone who's really coming from a place of purity, that they're wanting to make change for the better for all. You're not going to help yourself in that regard. And then everyone else who even looks or remotely sort of sounds like what you're doing, they're going to get tainted by that same idea. And so this is where the freedom movement, unfortunately, keeps falling into the trap over and over again. And they're not thinking in a way outside of the box. And that's what's going to be required. It's not something you've done before. It's something that hasn't been done before. You need to start moving into that space. Instead of having that crisis of imagination, activate your imagination. Start conceiving outside the things you've done up until this point, because clearly they're not working. And the only place you can meet is in a neutral ground where there is no way that it can be hidden, right? Where it doesn't favor or it doesn't discriminate, right? That is on objective truth that we can all identify. And so far, all these people, what they put out has got nothing to do with it. But that's not the central thing that I'm wanting to highlight. It'll be something else. So we're going to start with this guy. If I can get it to play, that is.
The British Constitution, the English Common Law Constitution is Magna Carta.
So now he's saying the English Common Law Constitution is Magna Carta. What does that mean? Does that mean just England? Doesn't make any sense, right? So bit of confusing. Anyone who doesn't know what Magna Carta is, it's not the entire document. There's some articles that are written into it that are constitutional, right? First you have to understand what a constitution is. It's the relationship that defines how government is to behave towards the people, right? So when you call government, you're just calling a system of public servants. That's all it really means. There is no actual government because govern means control and ment means mind. So the better way to put it is the system of public servants. That's it. Because service is the only way you've got something to offer somebody. Anything else is dictatorship. And you won't get people just openly agreeing to be dictated to. It doesn't happen. So that's the first premise, right? And inside the Magna Carta, there's maybe 3, maybe 4, possibly 5 articles that are called common law articles that have got to do with the principles of morality that are neutral, that are discoverable, that do not favor, nor do they discriminate, right? That we're all able to verify, we're all able to access. That's what that's really about now. He's going to tell you a bunch of other things that's got to do with the British Empire that's in total opposition to that.
But the British Empire's constitution is Magna Carta, 1688 Bill of Rights, 1700 Act of Settlement, 1640 Habeas Corpus, redone again in 1670 for clarity.
So what he's telling you now is that you're taking some aspect that's got a way to be able to be verified in reality, which is the common law articles. And now you can mix that with a bunch of things that politicians put together, like people in Parliament, our servants, and they can now make that like binding on everybody. Now, how can a system of public servants, which are meant to provide a service, create a set of rules that are binding on the people they're supposed to be serving? Really think about that as a contradiction, right? Is that a contradiction or is that legitimate? Now, if you don't understand that, that's going to be a big struggle from this point onwards, right? But if you can get that concept past your mind, then there's a chance for you to get some more, get some more value out of what's coming next, right? So we're going to move on to the next one. And it's not going to seem related on the surface, but you'll see later how it is.
Right now, You must provide the material evidence that you're not a business. You're under penalty of perjury now, I remind you, officer. I know the law very well. I study contract law.
So now he's said that he knows the law, which is one meaning. Then he puts the word contract in front of it, which is an entirely different thing. That's got nothing to do with law, what he's talking about. That is all a bunch of ramblings, a bunch of rules set up by a superior class, or who elect themselves as superior class, to control the others through force. And that's their justification by how they do it, right? And so that's what he's saying, that he knows. Now let's listen to what else he says.
All right? I know exactly what goes on here. You do not have jurisdiction over me. I am under the jurisdiction, and within the jurisdiction, and here we go, here's my identification, of the Global Federal Postal Courts.
So now he's saying that he's under the control, he's openly admitted to that, of some organisation that he's never met, doesn't know who's involved in it, right? It's just like saying, you know, you go down the local footy club and you say, look, I've never met you guys, but you know what, I'm really happy for the way you go about things, and now I want to be under your protection, right? And then you're going to, you know, give me a bunch of codes and rules and stuff like that, and then I'm going to go quote that around when anyone tries to boss me around. And that's now just going to be like relevant to them, and they're going to go, oh yeah, no worries, I didn't realize you were special like that. Okay, so that's virtually what's being said here. And they don't even know they're doing it, right? Which has got nothing to do with law, because law is something that's universally discoverable, that we're all bound to, whether we like it or not. And that's not anything man can do. They can't create laws. They can create a bunch of rules and put the title of law on it, but it in itself is not law. And if you are quoting things that others have invented that you've never met, right, and you're saying that's law, that's you're not understanding the principle, right? That's what's being missed here. But that's still not the central factor of what's tying all these together. So we're going to move on to the next guy.
Now, along with that copyright notice, which is a few pages, you're welcome to have a read, fellas. Also, there's a private security agreement in place as well, which is also being filed with my collateral. Now, all of my ID has been listed as collateral under that security agreement. There also happens to be...
Did you ever see the face on that copper there? Like, he's like going, what the hell is all this about? Like, really? Why am I being put through this?
A private agreement done in the same way, which is also filed in international trust law, along with the Uniform Commercial Code. I've also then gone and done what's referred to as a hold harmless indemnity agreement. Now, this holds me harmless against any claims made against the name, because the name's under copyright, which I control. This here is the UCC financial filing statements and the amendments made, which is what is being filed in Washington, because that's where these sort of records are all kept and filed, as they're recognised internationally under the Uniform Commercial Code laws. And this is all my information there, and printouts of the filings that I've done for.
So there you have it, guys. Like, he's listed a bunch of stuff that's got to do with some place that he's never been to, doesn't know anything about the people who invented it, right? Just trusting that this somehow has some merit in reality, right? So does he have any control over how that structure came together? No. So there's something really critical about why you would even like want to do that. Like, why? What would be in your mind? Is it not about trying to get out of something, a win in the moment? Think about why you would even do something like that, because on the if you really look into it, not on the surface, but into it like really, and you start looking deeply, that's like just handing yourself over to a bunch of systems and rules to some kind of cult that created something for their own benefit, and you like want to sneak in and be part of their club just so you can get the benefits of it, but you don't actually want to do the initiation part. You know what I mean? That's pretty much what this is they're trying to do here, right? And is that how freedom can exist for all of us? Because what they're modeling is, well, if we all want to be free, we need to use the criminal structure and have them go, yeah, okay, we grant you freedom now because you've worked out how we did it and how we're exclusively giving ourselves permission to do what we like. We're just going to allow that to happen now. Like, really think that through. Now we're going to move on to the next guy.
15th of August, Tuesday. It's a sitting day up there in Parliament. Okay, so anyone wanting to clarify that, and they've also cut out my pledge for all Australians to become a member of the Great Australian Party, the greatest Australian party ever. And I want you to have skin in the game, because we've just again received another notice from the Australian Electoral Commission. If we do not provide 1,500 further 1,500 clean skin members, the party will be deregistered. There is no question about that.
So again, what's he talking about? So it's all one thing, centralized power, right? He's saying that these are the rules set up by somebody else, and if we want to be part of the game that they created so they can be in charge, we need to play by their rules. Now, is that the sound of someone who's freedom? Does that sound like someone who's really got their mind to fight for freedom for all? Or is it the sound of someone who wants to keep the structure alive? And the structure I'm talking about is called structural violence. And people who haven't heard that before, that's probably something I'll start using a bit more often to get you more familiar with it. Right? So structural violence is centralized power. That's one understanding of it, right? And every single one of those people that I just played for you, they all operating from that structure and granting authority to centralized power because they didn't have any input in any of those rules. As soon as you don't have input in any of the rules, but you claim that you are bound to them, that's you being beholden to a ruling class. Right there. That's the real principle that very few understand. You cannot win your freedom by using the ruling class's rules. They didn't set it up for that purpose. You know, very few people are really coming out and saying that. I've not heard anyone in these so-called freedom movements coming out and actually putting it like that. And that's the mental slavery. That's the thing that gets people dragged in because they're seduced by the psychological relief of believing they can get a win in the moment. And every time you do that, you are creating more pain and suffering because there's no such thing as winning freedom in the moment. There is just freedom that prevails or it doesn't. It's one or the other. You cannot win it just temporarily, get a reprieve. That's not freedom. That's still slavery. And if you want to get rid of the whole system, you have to understand the structure, right? And that it's designed to violate freedom. Because as soon as someone has centralized power, you don't have freedom. Because they get to make the rules and you get to play along with them if you want to survive. And it's about getting rid of that entire thing. Now I'm going to move on to another way that I like the way that Larkin puts it. So let's listen to how he puts it.
To see that not only will the political process never achieve freedom, and it never has before. If you want to point out an example anywhere in history, at any point in history, where voting has led to freedom, go for it. I don't know of any. Not only is that not the solution, it is the problem. And I use the analogy of the slave who every day, thinks what he's going to say to his master, and he gets this eloquent, heartfelt speech of why he should be free. Every day he goes to his master and says, "Master, here is why you really should free me." And he goes on for half an hour while his master isn't even paying attention. His master says, "Yeah, get back to work." That goes on until the end of time, unless one day the slave says, "I don't need his permission to be free." And then he walks away. That is what has to happen. As long as we petition and we whine for or against this or that legislation, and we vote and we cry to the masters and we protest to the masters, the one message that comes through is, we agree that it is up to you, masters, what we are allowed to do. Whatever you say after that, they don't hear, and it doesn't matter. When the day comes that we don't go to them, we don't protest, we don't vote, we just turn our backs on them and ignore them, that's how you get to freedom, and that's the only way you ever get to freedom, because as long as you are begging the master for his permission to keep what you earn or run your own life or make your own choices, you're not even free inside your own head. As long as you imagine you need legal permission to be free, you will never be free, which is why most of what I focus on is getting people to understand the authority you hallucinate into government is not real. They are a gang of thugs, and that is all. Stop calling their commands laws. It gives it legitimacy. They aren't laws, they're threats. They boss us around and hurt us if we disobey. Stop calling their extortion taxation. It's not. It's just extortion. It's just as immoral as a carjacker or a guy on the street robbing little old ladies at gunpoint. When we stop hallucinating them as our rightful masters, they will stop being our rightful masters, because they never were. We were taught to imagine that's what they are. When people say, "Do you want to abolish government?" I say, no, any more than I want to abolish Santa Claus. I just want people to understand it's not real. And if you will deal with your life understanding reality, things work a lot better than if your life depends upon responding to something that isn't real. To see.
Whoops, that one got away from me. So hopefully, I know there was a lot in there. The central tenet in there is about how we imagine that someone has power over us. That's what centralized power is the imagination that others can have power over us. Yet, in our hearts, we don't like it when people exercise power over us, right? So it's living in contradiction. So then he talks about that whole thing about calling it a law, right? And that legal, what you're allowed to do, right? They're all mental constructs. And everything that those four people that I played just before, they're all attached to this legal idea. That's the problem, guys. They're all inventions. They don't exist in reality. And it's about understanding that principle. Now I'm going to show you like the real way that government actually exists in our minds. Pay attention. There's a guy in orange here and he constantly keeps repeating. I'll see if you can figure out what the trick is. And that's actually how government works, right? It runs on the illusion that it has power. This next video is a really, really good depiction of that. Do you see how willing they were to take it after they saw him get kicked in the butt? Well, what does government do? It always makes an example out of anyone who chooses to defy it. And then everyone else after that goes, yeah, I'll take it. I'll do what you want. Do you know what I mean? There it is right there. It's perfect depiction. There's one more coming. Do you see how quickly he ran away? How much of a hurry he is to avoid the punishment? That's the game, guys, right? As soon as you stop imagining that they have the power to do that, right? Even if they pull that on you, it won't have the power because people around you will be able to see it too. They'll be able to see that that's a setup, right? But the people didn't see that that was a setup, so they took it as legit. And that's the screen we need to pull down, right? It's the setup. It's the mind game. How they get away with it is the trick of the mind. And you're not seeing how they're doing it. And until you can do that, you're going to remain falling for the same traps that these four people that I showed you first up keep falling for, right? And that's about maturing and moving past that if you really want freedom. All right, so we're going to go to some actual quotes now from Larkin Rose that I really love how, because I've seen this show up myself in some of the comments that show up on my page, right? The same thing gets repeated. So people really show that this is reality. So here we go. Statists claim that appointing rulers is the only way to overcome the imperfections and untrustworthiness of man. Right? You think about that contradiction, right? So if everyone you believe is untrustworthy, and they're imperfect, well, who are you going to elect from? You're going to have to elect one of those, aren't you? So how does that make any sense, right? And that's the worst religion that exists on the planet, is that idea that there is someone who has the right to be an authority over others, right? That's what a statist is, someone who believes in that. Statists look out at a world full of strangers who have questionable motives and dubious morality, and they are afraid of what some of those people might do. That in itself is a perfectly legitimate concern. But then, as protection against what some of those people might do, the statist advocates giving some of those people of questionable virtue a huge amount of power and societal permission to rule over everyone else. Think about the insanity of that, guys, right? I've been saying mental illness for a while. Hopefully you're starting to see why I've been saying that word. In the vain hope that by some miracle, those people will happen to decide to use their newfound power only for good. Now, when have you ever seen anyone who's never had any constraints on them actually just be like totally egalitarian? When have you ever seen that happen, right? Like there's another like mental trick that gets played on people, and it's because of their fears. Their fear is so bad, they just want that immediate temporary relief of believing that something could be better if they grant authority outside instead of taking responsibility themselves, right? That is the trick. The statist looks at his fellow man and thinks, I do not trust you to be my neighbor, but I do trust you to be my master. How spot on is that? Almost every statist admits that politicians that politicians are more dishonest, corrupt, conniving, and selfish than most people, right? You think about post-COVID, right? Most people would have said that they didn't trust politicians, right? Yet we still allow the system to go on. And then all of a sudden they trusted them. How about that? Wow, how did that just happen, right? But still insists that civilization can exist only if those particularly untrustworthy people are given both power and the right to forcibly control everyone else. There's the mental illness right there. He nails it, right? That is what's holding people back. They are incapable of conceiving how we can all get along in a self-organized way because we don't trust a few people. They are lacking that capacity to conceive how it's possible. That's called death of the imagination. And you can only make slaves if their imagination ceases to work, to be able to envisage another way of being that doesn't exist right now. And this system has done a brilliant job on it because so many people who still believe they're freedom fighters cannot get past this point. I hear it so often.
Because in fact, politics is not really meant to be the thing that government is involved in.
How many people have ever heard that before? This is where knowledge is power, guys, if you understand it and then are willing to act on it. So let's listen on.
Well, we shouldn't really be having government, that thing we think of as government, involved in anything at all. It's meant to be us governing.
That's super powerful, right? Again, if you can't conceptualize what that means and how you would self-govern, then you're lost, right? You're back in the old model. Well, I can't think of another way to do it, so we just go with what we know, right? And what has he said? It's meant to be us governing. That thing called government is not meant to be what it is now. It's meant to be a system of public servants serving the people, providing services, right? Not dictation, not despotism, not totalitarianism. And if you are mentally enslaved and you don't understand certain principles, you are inviting that on yourself. And that's where we still are. After all this pain and agony, the majority of people are still in that space where they're inviting more suffering because they're not ready to wake up yet. These are all invitations. All these things that are happening, they're all invitations to wake up and get past the mental prison. Yet, there's far too little people who actually want to apply themselves or are willing to get past their points, what they've attached to as truths. So let's listen on.
Through that jury process. But politics, as you call it, and I think of politics as party politics.
Indeed.
Largely.
Yes.
Is something quite recent. It only really emerged in the early to mid 1700s, in fact. And we think of party politics as democracy.
Right.
Which it isn't. Because the democratic mechanism, the primary mechanism of democracy, is actually the thing that I explained at the beginning, which is this this mechanism of where you have a natural law tribunal deciding on justice within society every day, all over the country when cases come before it. That's the definition of democracy. That's really what democracy is. It's not really adult suffrage, which is what the political system is. So that's emerged much more recently, and it's not something that government should be involved in at all. The minutiae of our day-to-day lives, policy on our lives, really law is really only meant to be about moral behaviour. That's it, nothing else. So what I suppose I'm saying is that in a pure society, when you're functioning under a proper constitution, under a common law constitution, you wouldn't really have a political sphere at all. Politics in that regard wouldn't be happening because life would be simpler and it wouldn't be about you have to have a license for this, that, and the other. You can't drive into this city without paying this, that, and the other, or whatever it is. That just doesn't exist because it's not their area. They don't have the authority to deal with that kind of stuff. So,
how many people have ever heard anyone say that? Like, that is a bombshell, guys. If you can fully understand that, now I'm guessing there's a lot of people are not going to be able to comprehend what's just been said here because their attachment to what they've only ever known in existence is all they can imagine, right? That's the real crisis here. If you can, hopefully it'll start helping free your mind from the chains that are still there. That's the point of these videos, right? It's to help free your mind from the chains that are self-imposed, the things that you've accepted as truths that don't exist in reality. And it's about, are you willing to look deep to really understand the principles behind what is required for freedom? So a natural law, a natural, I think called a natural law justice tribunal or a natural tribunal, right? All that is that you are using your conscience as the highest authority, right? And we all share that. That doesn't favor anyone when you are coming from pure conscience, not ego. There's a difference between the two. A lot of people confuse the two. They're not the same thing. Your conscience is the thing that will prick up all these feelings inside you when you know there's an injustice going on, right? And everyone has the same reaction. So there we're the same. There's no difference. Now we're going to listen to Will get into a bit more of that.
The law of the land, common law, legem terrae in Latin, was largely formed around the late Saxon times. So King Alfred certainly was famous for that. Edward the Confessor was absolutely key in putting that together, those customs. And that's what forms the central principles of our Constitution. They're principles. It's not legislation or codified law. It's or legislation. It's a set of principles by which you are defining, what government can do, what it can't do, defining the rights of the people to have a trial by jury and convene it, and to decide on the justice of law. Those are the central principles of your Constitution. And it predates Magna Carta of 1215, the Great Charter. So that sort of time, late Saxon kings going into the early Norman period, was probably a much purer form. That was when there was pushback, and of course the formation of modern declaration of our Constitution, which is the 1215 Magna Carta. That was for the powers that be, that was a pretty bad time. That was a bad moment for them.
Now, I want you to think about the first four people that I played to you. Did they ever mention anything close to what you've just heard here? Now, do you need to write copious volumes into a book that explains those core principles? Is that needed? Or is that just something we already inherently know? So that's the thing that very few people understand, is that you don't need to write things into elaborate details, right? We all have them. It's just whether you know how to express them. That's what's missing. Right? And all those books that were written, they're there to take your knowledge of how to express those things that are inherent inside you away, to create the mental prison that gives authority to others who you believe will know better than you, to create these structures, do you know what I mean, that you are dependent upon if there's going to be some kind of harmonious society. And it's never happened in history. There's never been a harmonious society because of that very fact. And it's being able to see that's what's really holding people back. So we're going to see what else Will's got to say.
A constitution isn't codified. A constitution might be written. And contrary to what we're always told, our constitution is written as well. It's in the 1215 Magna Carta. It's included within it. Okay, so the chapters of the 1215 Magna Carta contain within it some of those chapters being what are called the Articles of Common Law. So you're looking at chapter 39, 40, 61, and there are one or two others too, which are the central principles of our Constitution as expressed within that document. So the idea of what they call a written Constitution doesn't quite mean in the plain English sense that it's written in a document. In their world, for a constitution to be written, it has to be like a dedicated single document, really clearly, which is much more like the American Constitution. So I tend to correct people and say, well, actually, it is written in the plain English sense. It is actually a written document. And they know that, actually. And if you remind various people like, David Starkey and Sumption and, I'm sure they know that, and you could get them to admit that, really. So it is a written constitution. There's no question about it. It's just not codified. Now, to answer your question about, there's a slight danger in saying let's have a completely blank landscape and let's form a new constitution. If the large portion of the people have no idea what the central principles are, or the central pillars of what you would need to support the society of liberty, of freedoms. And when people don't fundamentally know what are the central pillars of a democratic constitution, you've got a real danger there. Because if the system comes down and you have a vacuum again, I think we know what would happen then. That's quite a
Yes.
good position for the other side to come in and just, So either way, whatever happens, it's absolutely critical that large numbers of the population start to understand what it is that supports liberty and limits the power of government. That's why I'm starting to educate people.
That's the key.
So there's a lot in that, guys. So I highly recommend you go back and listen to it again. It all comes down to principle. That's all that's required. You don't need to have these copious books, because all those books that the first guy likes to rave on about, that's somehow legitimate. Their job is to do the opposite of understanding principle, right? And if you can understand that, then no matter what happens, however society breaks down, you'll be able to regrow and regroup from those principles, because you're building from a foundational cornerstone that doesn't favour anyone. But if you don't understand that, and those first four people I showed you are not showing any understanding of that, they're still going into some centralized power system. That's pretty much all they do, is promote the centralized power system. And that's that structural violence. They're just going to create more of the same. That's why nothing in society ever changed. No matter how many collapses happened in empires, they still didn't understand fundamental principles when they went to rebuild. So before you know it, the same structure that never left is just getting resurrected again. Just with different people at the helm. That's all that happens. So until that shift happens, of people really understanding the fundamental principles that are required for us to live freely amongst one another and to cooperate and have abundance, if that's not available in people's consciousness, then there's more of the same. It'll just be different people at the helm. That's it. And that's what this has always been about. It's about helping people see behind the deception, right? And how far and deep they've been deceived. And do you have the courage to face that if that's you, right? Because if you don't, you're going to keep repeating the same patterns and nothing's changed. No matter how much suffering occurs, you're not going to be able to recognize how that even started. What's the root cause of it? Because everything has a root cause, and it's always the same one. One more from Will.
Is the system you're referring to from those perhaps more golden period in history, would that now fit in that, under those conditions of complexity? Would it have to be modified to a degree, or
yes, probably,
or would it? How would it harmonise with where?
Well, I think, and it's really difficult to know.
Of course,
absolutely. I mean, there's no, and I think you're right. It's a really good question. I think, would the pure form of our constitution actually work with a modern, centralised society? No, definitely not. So what would have to change? Society would have to change. Simple as that. You either have your convenience, your modern conveniences, where you distance control and you lose that sovereignty, in which case you're going to have problems. You're always going to bring that cycle back on yourself. Or you simplify life. That doesn't mean to say it can't be connected. What it does mean is that it can't be centralized. And I think that's a key difference.
I think that's also one of the core tenets and themes of this weekend, whether by intention or not, is the decentralization.
Sovereignty, yeah.
Sovereignty.
Yeah.
So there you have it, guys. They've said it right there. There cannot be any sovereignty unless there's decentralization. Now, the reason why I've been trying to educate people about Magna Carta 1215 is because that is decentralization, right? It means that Parliament doesn't get to just do a one-size-fits-all, everyone's under whatever they write out. It's that each individual community gets to decide the quality of whatever that legislation is through the jury, right? And if there's anyone that's affected in a negative way, that does not apply to those individuals. And if there seems to be a pattern of Parliament creating legislation that keeps violating rights, then that jury has the power, not that specific one, but some jury at some point, to actually bring those politicians, which wouldn't be politicians, they'd just be representatives of Parliament, to the people where they stand trial for having this pattern of constantly violating rights because they take an oath. That's the thing, guys. The oath is the line between criminal and legitimate behavior. That's why they have an oath. Very few people understand what that really means. The oath is a pledge that you willingly understand what it is to stand on moral principle, and that if you are going to actively go against it, you understand there's consequences for that. That's what it is. And then if you do, you're not going to bitch and moan about it. You're going to say, yeah, okay, well, I breached it. Okay, it's no under duress here. I went into this willingly. I didn't hold to the agreement. Now that's on me. I need to take it in the neck because that's what, that's what I've done. I've breached your rights, and there's no one has any right to breach anyone's, right? If we do that, we've got chaos, and that's where we live now. So if you think that's a relic, right, then yeah, dismiss it all you like. But that's still in play to this day. That's the only thing that exists that's provable. Anyone can prove it if they want to find it. Not look on government websites, so you're not going to find it there. Why would they? That makes no sense. And it can be found how it's still active to this day. And that's what the criminals are afraid of. That's why they've made all these stories up about it being legitimate, that it's just for a bunch of elite barons, that the king was under duress when he signed it. It wasn't ever signed anyway. It was sealed, a totally different thing. You know, they've got that there was a contract between him and the Pope, and yada yada. You get all these stories, right? That the Constitution is in one place, it's in a bunch of different places when it comes to the British one. Do you know what I mean? Australia has its own constitution, yet they all take oaths to the one monarch that is the overriding, what we call a public servant for the entire Commonwealth. That doesn't make any sense, how you can have a separate constitution, yet you're bound to that. Like the two things are in contradiction to each other. Very few people understand that, actually. And so there's this constant story that people come up with, right? A mental prison that stops them from actually understanding core principles. Now, I've got, I think, one or two more slides to play, or videos. Let me see.
Around formalizing a new constitution that will perhaps draw upon what's already written in those documents like the Magna Carta, would help us to clarify those misunderstandings and reformalize that relationship between.
So my simple answer to that is I don't have an issue with forming a new constitution at a point when the people largely understand the central principles of what a democratic common law constitution must contain.
Yes.
So I would break it down.
Yes.
A democratic constitution breaks down to three principles. You've got to have a natural law tribunal,
Yes.
which is where the people can judge justice
Yes.
for themselves. Because in doing that, they're kind of defining their own liberties.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's the first thing and the most important. The second thing is that you would have some form of head of state who, if you were to replicate this in some tribe in the Amazon jungle or whatever it is a wise elder of the village who promises in perpetuity to keep that in place. And then the third thing is optionally, you could have a legislature, an existence of legislation, which is basically nothing more than a set of rules and regulations that all they do is bring people before judgment of their peers. They don't have the power to punish themselves. So if you break a statute, you don't automatically get a punishment. You just get brought before that judgment of your peers, of your social equals, who are then using their consciences to judge the morality behind what it is that you've done. Yeah. So that's it. Those are the three principles of the Constitution. Now, as long as you have that in place, and a lot of people in society understand that those are the principles, we could have a new Constitution. Fantastic.
Yes.
Really simple, guys. It doesn't need to be complicated. If you know best for yourself, what's best for you, right? How can you allow someone else to dictate that to you through some ritual that's written in Parliament, right? That's order following. And if you're not an order follower, then how do you express that, right? You need to have a mechanism that stops that from being imposed on you. And this is the lack of knowledge, right, that people don't have, so they can't imagine a different way to be. That's why they fall for all the traps that have been set for them, because they don't have this fundamental principled knowledge. And that's what's missing, guys. That's the whole point why I do these educational videos, is to help that along. You know, the things that people are struggling with, to help lift that fog for them, right? The things you intuitively know are being suppressed by your ego, and having the courage to be able to acknowledge that. Because you've attached to life in a particular way because it required you to in order to survive. And so then you start believing that this is who you are, where it actually isn't. And that takes a lot of courage to face up to that. That's what they call death. I think they call dark night of the soul in spiritual terms, right? It's about dissolving all those impurities, those inaccuracies, those things that do not belong to you. You know, this is the real work, the inner work that needs to happen if you want to be free. It's not someone coming to rescue you, guys. It's you rescuing yourself from your own beliefs and delusions. And you have the capacity to do that because you were pre-stamped with a conscience, right? You have a moral compass. If you refuse to use that, then you pay the price, and we all pay the price with you. All right, I think there's one more video to finish. Oh no, actually I'm going to talk about the hierarchy of oaths, actually, just so people understand how and why we even have oaths. The coronation oath of the office holder of sovereign. So remember what I said about sovereignty. Their job is to hold that in place, that people can remain free without being having any sort of external impositions on them. That's why it's called the office holder of sovereign. Think about why they've chosen it that way. Because sovereignty is decentralization of power. Stands as the apex of a pyramid, setting limitations for all subordinate oaths. So if you think about who takes oaths to the monarch, it's the police, it's the military, it's members of parliament, it's any sort of judicial officer. They're not meant to be judges or magistrates, that's another thing, right? And there'll be sort of public servants, the heads, most likely. So they're all subordinate. So whatever that oath is that the most senior public servant takes, which we call the monarch, they're bound to those limitations, right? And so here it says, it encompasses moral, contractual, common law, and customary obligations, binding all who pledge allegiance to the sovereign. Now, if you don't understand that, you're not going to see how every single one of these people masquerading as a public servant is acting criminally. That's why this knowledge is critical. And that's why you go after them at that level. Nothing else. Not use all those codified systems they've got there. You're not going to get anything of any value of changing there. It's about understanding the actual system that's supposed to be in place that they are not honouring. This oath defines governmental duty and is sworn for the nation, the Commonwealth, and all dominions. That's what it's for, guys. Right? Hopefully that's helping. The armed services swear allegiance to the sovereign, not to the government of the day. This helps clarify the principle that allegiance is necessary and not optional, an essential part of the checks and balances of our Constitution. So anyone who follows legislation is criminal. They don't swear an oath to Parliament. Really need to understand that. Without these oaths and their lawful enforcement, we have little to protect us from government by tyranny. There you have it, guys. That's exactly why we've been living the lives we've been living. Is because the people don't understand the oath, nor do the oath takers, right? Yet the oath takers have a bigger responsibility than the people because they took it. They said words they don't understand. That's no one else's responsibility but theirs, and they didn't care enough to want to understand it, right? To go, what does this mean? What am I saying? That's on them. That's why you have a conscience, guys. You can't claim, oh, I didn't understand, no one taught me. Yeah, you've got your own mind. You can figure stuff out, and why didn't you care enough to go look into it, right? This is where we can really go and get them, guys.
To vote or not to vote, which is already posted from the Libertopia that just happened. The thing is, you can't get to there by getting a nicer master. And to say, I want a guy who's going to let me keep more of my money and let me keep my guns and let me make more of my choices and let me smoke pot, really, in a practical sense, and I say this all the time, if I had to be owned by somebody, I wouldn't mind being owned by Ron Paul, because I bet he would be pretty nice to me. But that is not good enough for me, and it shouldn't be good enough for human beings. I don't want a nicer master who will give me permission to be free, because that is no closer to being free, any more than a slave being purchased by a different slave master who doesn't work him as hard and lets him do more stuff. He isn't 1 inch closer to being free, even if in his daily life he's more comfortable and he gets to keep more stuff and he feels like he has more freedom. The underlying lie is still there that he is the property of someone else. And as long as the belief in government remains, that is people believing they are the property of somebody else. If you think somebody else gets to decide tax rates, in other words, somebody else gets to tell you how much of what you earn you keep, the fact that he says you get to keep 90% instead of you get to keep 50% may make you more comfortable on a practical level, but you are no closer to being free. In fact, in a sense, you're farther away, because the more painful it gets, the more people are able to consider maybe the whole thing is a joke. I was just talking a second ago. A smart tyrant in this situation would do across-the-board tax cuts, repeal all sorts of laws, and back things up and say, you have my permission to be free, to keep the lie stuck in people's heads that government is legitimate and you should obey their laws and pay their taxes.
So what do you think he's just explained there? Trump, white hats. That's the exact thing he's just explained, guys. This is why they do it the way they do it, guys. It's the same play, they just show you a different face. But ultimately, you are no freer, no matter how nice your master is. and you cannot compromise that principle. You're either free or you're not. And as soon as you're not, you don't own yourself, everything goes sideways. It always does. That's the way the laws of nature are geared. Either you are in charge of yourself or someone else is. And if you don't free your mind to understand that they're all illusory tricks to get you back in the prison, right? That's why they give you, well, we'll give you this and you'll get a better life if you do, just vote for us, all that stuff, right? That's what those first 4 people are promoting without knowing they're doing it, the ones I showed you at the beginning. And this is what needs to change, guys. It's a massive leap out of the prison. Alrighty, so that's what's on offer. So if you're really interested and if you've made it this far, I'm just going to show you one more aspect of where you can start going to really hone your knowledge. And that is all that's going to, I guess what I'm trying to say is that's the last of what I've got to show you here. Okay, and just to finish off, just to show you the Magna Carta 1215 Australia site. So this is a wonderful place to come to get knowledge in one spot. So just quickly showing the intro. There we have it. Just giving a little bit there. Then you've got news and articles. So just quickly going through, you can see Will Keat, there he is just there. So he features in it. You've got your learning, so you've got videos. Just again, Magna Carta lessons. Larkin Rose, what a surprise. And there's Will Keat again, etc. David Robinson, big input into Article 61 of the 1215 Magna Carta, so really worthwhile going over that. Mark Passio, all natural law stuff, that's all connected, guys. If people think it's not, don't understand how life works. So that's all connected, that's why it's there. Hidden knowledge that gets into the principles that most people sadly don't understand. John Locke, he does specific stuff on Article 61 and how it relates to us here in Australia. Neil Oliver's stuff in there as well, and there's John Locke again, and Magna Carta and Bill of Rights, so that's a big crime, Bill of Rights that is. So just quickly going through that for you. There's a notice process if you're interested in that, so all the stuff you need here, I'm just going to quickly just fly through it, you can look at it in your own time, all the different ways you can go, and let the criminals masquerading as public servants know the crimes they're committing, and that will all stand as evidence. When we do get those courts de jure, or légère terre, as Will was saying, and these are just things you can do right now if you don't want to do the notice process. It's one standalone letter you can send, different versions thereof, to the police and judiciary, and you've got also child protection. Where's child protection? I think it's here. There you go. Just really fast tracking through that. Social proof, you want to come see some evidence of people using Article 61, there it is there. Alright, different scenarios. There's community groups that are starting up, so you can see a few here. Alright, if you want to start your own, you can come join by going to the Contact Us page just here, if I can get it to work. And just send in your info there if you want to start your own community page in your local area. Okay, that's all I want to show about the site.